Good evening and welcome to True Dougman Encounters. I'm your host, Marvin Allen. If you or anybody that you've known have had a sighting or encounter and would like to share it on my channel, then please contact me. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Like, comment, and subscribe. As you all know, I posted on the page earlier today asking people if they would like for me to tell multiple encounters on one upload. So that's what I will be doing to give y'all quite a few to listen to. And as you all know, anonymity means a lot to me, and I breaks it for no one. So without further ado, let's jump right into our first encounter. Now this encounter right here happened in Tennessee. Now my eyewitness said he was home one weekend working in his shop that he had just on the back side of his house. And he said while out there one day working, he noticed that he could hear some shuffling or moving just behind him in the brush, just inside the wood line. So he looks, and when he looks, he see what he says look like to him is a goat. Now mind you, he know that people in the area has goats, and he thought that maybe one of them got out. He said, well, but stuck out the most to him was that this goat had like a diamond shape in the middle of his forehead. So he said he began to approach it to try to catch it so he can find out who it belonged to. He said that's when this goat turned and it ran off. He told his father about it, and he told him how it looked and the color that it was. And his father said, well, maybe, I don't know, we can ask, later on today or tomorrow. So after he said they finished working up in his workshop, they goes in, get themselves, clean themselves up, and get ready for dinner. My witness said while they was sitting down, getting themselves ready for dinner, they hear a knock at the back door. Boom, boom. Now at first, my witness thought that it was his friends playing tricks, so he tell his father. He said, that's probably just what you call him. I don't know why he keep banging on the door. I'ma just ignore him. So it happened again. So the third time that it happened, he called his phone. And he told him, he said, stop banging on the door because I know that's you. He said, no, that's not me. I told you we was going on vacation this weekend. So he said, well, if that ain't you out there, then who is it? So he hangs up the phone with him, brushes it off. Said after about 5 to 10 more minutes, it happened again. That's when him and his father, they gets up, they goes out, and they open the door. When they open the door and they walks out and they look, they see something that shocks both of them to their core. They see this large humanoid goat man like creature standing there looking at them. They said this thing was tall and massive. They said, but what got to them the most is what this creature had in his hands. They said in one hand it had the lifeless body of a little boy, and in the other hand this creature had an axe. Now, my eyewitness said he kept peeping at the boy in the axe. Then he noticed that the axe that this creature had in his hand came from out of his workshop. That's when the father turns, he goes in the house and he grabs the gun. They both got guns now. They looking at this creature. This creature is making noises at him now. So the father aims and he shoots, hitting the creature in the upper part of the chest and arm. The son shoots, striking this creature in one of its horns because he can see pieces and dust flies off when he hits it and shoots it. That's when the father say, "Don't shoot no more. Don't shoot no more." They said that's when this creature turned and it walked back down into the tree line, still carrying this lifeless dead boy by the neck with it. The next day they get up and they hear on the news that a young boy went missing in the neighborhood. That's when they knew that this thing that they saw was the thing that killed this little boy. I asked them how this thing looked. They said this thing looked at human and like a goat with a goat head, but the upper body was that of a human. Long arms with hands, and this thing had hoofs with horns and a very short, protruding, human goat-like face. But they said this thing was just massive. They said they never told anyone what they saw or what that creature had in his hands. That's the only time that they saw that creature or anything like that. And again, that happened in Tennessee. And we know it's a lot of things that come out of Tennessee. All type of cryptids. And that was my first encounter. Now, we're going to move on to the next true Doug Man encounter. Now, this encounter right here, it happened in Virginia. I will say the state. But as far as the county and town, I won't reveal that because of my eyewitness and because they asked me not to. And that's something I won't break for nobody. Now, my eyewitness said that they grew up in the country in Virginia. In Virginia. And they said while growing up, they always used to go out and adventure in the woods. He said when he was about 19, him and two of his friends, they goes out and they go hunting. Now mind you, they have tree stands that they go up in while hunting. So when they get to this spot, they goes up in this tree stand. And they start to survey and scan the area for any type of prey that they're hunting. So while up there, One of the friends say that he had to use the bathroom. He had to urinate. So my eyewitness tell him, he said, well, go ahead down and hurry up. Come on now, because we don't want to scare nothing that's coming in. So he goes down and he stands just on the side with his back facing out of the stand that they was in. So while he was down there urinating, I noticed that I hear something just off in the distance. And I look. I look through the scope of my rifle. That's when I spot something peeping from just behind a tree. It would come out and it would go back in. It would come out and it would go back in. And I tell my other friend up there, I say, look through your scope and tell me you see this thing just keep peeping in and out. Tell me I'm not crazy. So he looks and he do the same. And he said, yes, I see it too. So he tell his friend down there, he say, hurry up because there's something behind a tree and I don't know what it is. So his friend down there, he said, y'all just scared, man. Hold up, I ain't peed yet. I'm trying to hurry up and get it out. So he's still looking out the scope. He said that's when he see this thing that was peeping behind the tree, peeks out again, goes back, and he hears like a thump sound. And he said this wolf-like, dog-like creature comes out on all fours. Massive to be on all fours. He said, but the body was just, it built funny. It was off. He said that he was just wider up top as it got slimmer and tapered down as it went down towards the back. That's when it walked out and began to walk through the trees and the tree line. He tells his friends, he said, get up here. I don't know what this is, but it's some kind of black wolf dog. You need to get up here now. So he said, all right, man, I'm coming. So he finishes. His friend says when he turns around and he looks, he see this large black dog coming in their direction. He hurry up and he goes up into the tree stand. He grabs his rifle too. They said this creature stopped. Now he's still watching this thing. And it's just sitting there on all fours watching them. That's when they hear a break to the right of them. Crack! Like something just broke a stick or a tree. They look and they see another one of these creatures. But this one is standing up bipedal on his back hind legs. Massive, tall, huge. So my eyewitness says he aims his gun, shoots a warning shot. Boom! Creature let out this horrible, loud growl sound that shook them to their core. That's when that creature on his hind legs began to walk in their direction. My witness says he shoots again, but this time he strikes the creature in his lower leg, like where the thigh had. Pow! Because he could see it. He could see the movement of the leg when the bullet hit. He said that's when this creature dropped down to all fours it turned and it bolted. It bolted back up in the tree line. It just shot. The other one just stood there watching them. They said that this thing showed every teeth in his mouth like it was mad. They said that's when this creature stood. They said when it stood, it started to walk, and then it walked and it stood right just behind a tree. They said that this thing just stood like it was trying to hide itself. This is what's going through their mind. This is what they think at the time, but they don't know. They said this thing just stood there, right behind a tree, but you still could see the massive part of this thing body. That's how wide it was up top. They watched this creature. My witness said he let off another warning shot to this one. And when he let off that warning shot, he said this creature let out a sound that he never heard before in his life. That's when that creature turned. It dropped to all fours again and bolted up in the tree line. That's what my eyewitness said, man. We need to get down. We need to get out of here. So they get down from the tree stand. They started to walk back. They started to walk back to the main path so they can leave and get out of there. Because they don't know what they're dealing with. They don't know what this thing is capable of. Because at the time, they didn't know what this thing or these things were. As they walking and they get almost to the trail, my eyewitness said, he said they hear what sound like a football team charging, running through the tree line. He said when they heard that, they bolted. They ran. They made it back to their car, got in it, and left. They didn't even tell their parents about what happened or what they experienced that day in the woods of Virginia. He said these creatures was just massive, 7 to 8.5 feet tall, long arms, massive shoulders, long snouts, thick, long teeth, hands, but they had canine legs. They did research on these things to find out what people called them. And they called them Doug men or Doug-headed men. Now that was their encounter. And that one happened in Virginia. Now I'm going to take y'all to North Carolina, where I was grateful and blessed to get so many encounters from our witnesses. So without further ado, let's jump right into this next true Doug man encounter. Now this encounter happened in North Carolina. Again, I won't say the town or nothing like that because of my eyewitness asked me not to. So my eyewitness said she always grew up in the country. And she said that her grandparents still owned it, all the land they had. So she said that she was still go out there and visit them from time to time. So she said one summer she went out there to stay with them for a few weeks. She said now on their land, they would grow corn and other things like that. She said, but one thing she used to like doing was walking through the cornfield, the rows, when she was a little girl. So she said one weekend she was out there. She said this was late afternoon. And she was walking through the cornfield, just the rows. And she says as she was walking through the rows of cornfield, she said she could hear what sounded like something walking with her, just a few rows over. She said so she stopped. And she said the walking had stopped. She said so she bent down and she looked just to her left. And when she looked just to her left, she said she seen what looked like to her was some type of bent back legs that she could see. So she trying to figure out what this is or what this thing is, because she know it's not human. So she looking. So she said as she looking, she see whatever this thing was drops to all fours. She said, and when it drops to all fours, she said his head came down on this thing and it looks over in her direction. She jumps up and she starts running. She turns and she runs around and she runs back out of that corn maze. When she runs out of that corn maze, she calls for her grandfather. She calls her grandfather. She says he comes out the house and say, what's wrong? What's wrong? She said there's some type of monster or creature inside the cornfield. Grandfather goes in there and he grabs his shotgun. He comes out and he walks through. He walks through, but he sees nothing. So he goes in the house. He said, you sure it wasn't no coyote or some type of, stray dog or something? She said, no. Whatever this thing was, it was standing up at first, Grandpa. I'm telling you, there wasn't no ordinary animal that be in this area. I know that. So they went back and forth and then they dropped it. Later on that night, she had the room that faced the back there. So she said she stood up at that window for hours. And she said right before she was getting ready to lay down is when she could see the corn starts to sway and move. It would go on the line and then it would cut. Line and it would cut. And she would follow this movement with her eyes of whatever was doing this inside this corn maze. She said when it made it to the front of this corn maze, it stopped. So she looked, she focusing in. She said that's when she see something, parts. And she see this huge head comes from out this corn maze. And it looks up in her direction with those yellow, wide eyes. And it looks right up at her in the window, like it knew she was there. She said then it made this sound. She said it made a sound that shook her to her core. So she backed up. She turns. She goes in there. She wakes her grandparents up. They gets up. They comes in there. When they comes in there and they stand and they look, it's gone. And she tell her grandparents, she said it was there. I'm telling you, I know what I saw, but it must have left. She said a few days would pass. So one day, grandparents said they had to go in town. So she said, all right, I'll just stay here with y'all. He said, well, don't be out there after dark. If you claim you seen what you say you saw, some type of whatever, I don't know what it is. She said, okay, Grandpa. So they leave. She said she goes out and she sits out back, sits in a chair. She said while she was sitting in a chair, she was not that far from this little shack that her grandparents had on the property. She said while she was just sitting there, she could hear what sounded like feet or some type of movement rustling in the leaves. Twigs and stuff like that. So she hears sound like that. She says so she stands up. And when she stands up, she backs up towards the steps. Cause she ready to go back in the house now, but she looks. And when she looks, see this creature comes from behind now on all fours. And when it comes from around on all fours, it stood on the side of this little shack thing. And she said this thing reached what she said was a hand up, put it on the side of that little shack. And this thing stood up on its hind legs. She said that's when she ran up the few steps. She made it to the back door. She opened it. She stood in there. She said that's when this creature ran in her direction. She shut it, hurry up and then locked it. And she shut the curtains real quick. Just peeping out of the curtains, she could see this massive creature standing at the bottom of these steps, looking up in her direction. And as it looked up in her direction, she said she could have swore that this thing either smirked or smiled at her. Like it knew it was scaring her. So she called her grandparents and she told them that this thing was out back by the steps. They hurried up and get home. But again, this creature was gone. She tried to let her grandparents know what was on their property and what was prowling around in their cornfields. This massive creature that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't be here. Because when she was little, she never saw these things. Or was they there all the time, watching her, just waiting for the day to show themselves so she could see them. Now that was her encounter. And again, that happened in North Carolina. I have another one that comes out of North Carolina. And this one, my witness was on his way home. So without further ado, let's jump right into this next true Doug man encounter. And this encounter right here happened in North Carolina. My witness said he was at a friend's house. Would go over there on the weekends, spend some time with him, and then he would leave. He would walk home. Something he always used to do, all the time. He don't walk that same road. He said, but this night, that walk down that same road would change everything. He said, after spending time at his friend's house, he decided to leave before it got too late. And mind you, again, he done walked this road a many nights. And his friend asked him, do he want him to drive him home? He said, no, come on now. You know, I like to walk home. You know, I like to get this fresh air. He said, so I'll call you when I get there. So he leave. He continued to walk. So he continued to walk down this same long, dark road like he always did. He said, so while he was walking, he could hear something to his right, just inside the tree line. Like, like something would move, skip, move, skip. It said it just made a funny sound when he was walking. But he knew something was moving just inside the tree line. He said, so he walked it further to his left because he didn't want to be near just where you can walk on a little part of the dirt leading down into that little ditch and then the tree line. So he wanted to be far away from that. So he walking. He still hears this. So he stopped. When he stopped, the sound stopped. He looks over there. Mind you, all he have on him is his phone and the light from it. And he know that ain't gonna do no justice. So while he's standing there and he looking surveying the area, he sees nothing. He said, but just when he began to walk off, he catches eye shine of something. He see the eye shine and then it just started. He can hear something running through the tree line and then it stopped.
Did you get that cap off my Vaseline?
And then it stopped. And then it stopped.
Up here.
So he began to walk
Too loud.
again. And as he started to walk again, he heard those same sounds on the opposite side of the tree line. This time, every time he walked, whatever that was, it would start to walk. And he's walking. And this thing is walking too. So he stopped. Now he noticed that he can hear that sound on both sides of him. So he's standing there. He looking to his left and he looking to his right. When he looked to his right, he see eye shine. He looked to his left, he see eye shine again. Now he noticed there's something on both sides of the tree line. He said he starts to walk fast, and as he walked fast, he can hear something go boom, like it hit the road, but he don't look back. He said he hear what sounded like claws or nails hitting the road. Then he hear it again. Boom. He hear another set. Claws or nails walking right just behind him. Now he's scared. Like I told you, he done walked this road a many times. He done walked this same road a many nights. But this particular night, something decides to follow him, to walk right behind him. So he said he started to walk faster and faster. But whatever's behind him is keeping up. He said, so we stop again. And when he stopped, whatever's behind him stopped too. And he said he's staying there. And while he's standing there, he's looking at his phone. And he's saying in his mind, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's behind me. He said that's when he see some lights up in front of him in the distance coming in his direction. So as these lights is coming down, he turns around and he see these two large, huge, what he thought was dogs on all fours standing there in the middle of this road. Massive. He said these couldn't have been no ordinary dogs. He said because on all fours, these things was 4.5 to 5 feet tall. He'd never seen no dog like that. Massive, huge heads that these things had. He said so as the lights got closer, he turned back. Lights coming, he put his arms up because this driver must have had on his high beams, he said, and it stopped. That's when he can hear crash, crash. These things just crashing through the tree line, balling out. The lady in the car asked him, was you all right? And she asked, could she give him a ride? And he said, yes, please. And she gave him a ride and she took him home. He said he was so scared, but he had to tell somebody. And he told that lady about what he saw that night. He said he didn't see these things, fully stand up. He said, but he knew that they wasn't no ordinary dogs because of the size they was on all fours. And again, that happened in North Carolina. I have another encounter. And this encounter right here, it happened in Maryland here. So without further ado, let's jump right into this next encounter. This encounter here came from two eyewitnesses, two females. And they say they had got off of work one late afternoon and they was walking. Now she said where they was walking at was near some train tracks that they had to basically go by. And she said while they was walking, one of the eyewitnesses said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "Hear what?" "Sound like something walking on rocks or something." So she said, "Stand still, be quiet, listen." So they listened and they heard. That's when they walk over and it looks down at these tracks and they see three large black dogs walking just on the side of these tracks. My eyewitness asked her friend, she said, "They some big dogs." She said, "I know, they are huge. What kind of dogs are those?" So she said that's when one of them looked up at her. And when it looked up, she said it was just not that far from a tunnel that they was getting ready to go through. She said when it looked up at her, she said that last creature that looked up at him, it stood up. And when it stood up, she said this thing showed him its teeth. She said this thing was huge when it stood up on its hind legs. She said, that ain't no dog. She said then it turned and it walked. And it walked towards the tunnel. Now mind you, the other two is on all fours. They go through the tunnel up in there. And that last one that was on his hind legs, it just walked. It walked, but never taking its eyes off of these two women. And it watched them. It stopped again before it entered this tunnel. And it made this growl. She said when it made this growl, they just turned and ran. They got out of there. Now, their encounter wasn't really long. Now, mind you, I ran into another eyewitness who saw one. Now, the one he said he seen was dark brown. And he said he heard the same thing, like something was walking on rocks. And he turned and he looked down there. You see this dark brown, what he thought was a dog. He said, but it was like a radiator, some kind of generator down there. He said, but when this thing walked it past this generator on all fours, he said, this thing towered over there. He said, and this generator had to be 4.5 to 5 feet. He said, this thing towered over it on all fours. He said, and as this thing was getting ready to enter this tunnel, it stood up on its hind legs and walked up in the tunnel. I don't know if this is an avenue for these creatures where they walk at, but that's just the second one that I've gotten in the past few months of someone seeing them on them tracks. Again, that was the two eyewitnesses that I had got that was here. And like I said, I was just so happy and so blessed and grateful to get their encounters, man, because like I said, it really means a lot when people share their encounters with me. So without further ado, let's jump right into this next true Doug Man encounter. Now this encounter right here, the eyewitness didn't want me to even tell the state. And I couldn't get mad I couldn't debate with him. I just left it as that because, again, I'm grateful just to get their encounter. And their encounter happened on coming back from vacation, driving. They said while driving, coming back on vacation, they said it started to rain. Not hard, but just slightly. It started to rain. She said while driving and while the rain drizzling coming down, she said she see a store just to her right, gas station store, and she goes up in there to grab a few things and to stop and get some gas too. That's what she did. She goes in, she put the gas in the tank, she buys her a few things and back off to head back home. So when she driving again, the rain has stopped. So as she driving, her lights hit something on the side of the road. So she slowed down and she could see something dark, the back of it though. And she could see like movement, like it's doing something. So she stopped completely. Now mind you, the lights is hitting this thing. So she said while she's sitting there and she's looking, she see this thing turn. And while it's turning, she see a long snout on this thing. It turns around and it looks in her direction. She could see blood on the teeth of this thing. And like it was dripping down off of its snout. Like it was dripping down blood and saliva. She said that's when this thing stood up. And this creature was eating on a deer. She said this thing stood up on its hind legs. She said this thing was massive. This thing was huge. Long arms with hands. She said this thing had a massive head, long, thick snout, with bent back legs. She said this thing was eating on the body of a deer. She said then this thing starts to walk out on the road. She said this creature takes what's left of this deer and throws it back towards the tree line and began walking in her direction. She said she didn't know what to do. She started beeping her horn and flicking her lights. The lights, high, low, high, low, high, low. She started flicking the lights. She said that's when this creature stopped. She don't know if it did something to it. She said, but that's when this thing stopped. And it made this growl, this powerful growl that shook her to her core. It made this powerful growl that shook her to her core. Now, mind you, she puts her car in reverse and began to drive back slow. That's when this creature begins to walk again in her direction. So she stopped. She stopped. She makes sure all her windows are up and her doors are locked. She just sat there. This time, this creature kept on walking. And it walked. She said it walked till it stood in front of her car. Then walked around the side. She said this thing had to be intelligent because it tried to open her door. Went around the other side and it tried to open that door too. That's when she said this thing took its claw nail and ran it down the window of her car. She said the sound was so eerie that it just made her feel funny inside. It just freaked her out. She said that's when the creature turned and walked back towards the back of the car. She said when that creature did that, she put it back in drive, bolted, took off. She said she just took off. She said when she did that, that's when this creature just started chasing behind her. Now, mind you, it's nighttime and she driving and the road was still wet. She said, but she was not gonna let that thing catch her. But she said this thing was on her. She said this thing was right there. She said, and as she was driving, because she on the straightaway, she said this thing was on the side of her car. And she said it like bumped her a little bit. It's like she fishtailed a little bit. She said she almost lost control. But she managed to stay on the road, speed it up some more. She said that's when that creature slowed down and stopped. But she kept on driving till she couldn't see that thing no more in her rear view. She went home. She told her husband what she saw and how scared she was. That's why I say, man, these creatures, you never know when these things are gonna pop up. You never know when you on a dark road that you might see one of these creatures. So I'm gonna stop there on them encounters. Hope y'all enjoy them. I will upload some more later today. So with that, I'll see y'all on the next True Doug Man Encounters.